My research article was on looking at predictors of financial identity in emerging adulthood. Identity is a fundamental psychosocial task for young people beginning in their early teens. Adolescents, they start asking some of the following questions like, who am I? What am I going to do in my life? What kind of work do I want to do? What are my beliefs? The developmental psychologist Erikson in the early 1900s, he characterized identity as a fundamental task of adolescence and of the transition to adulthood. So when you're in college, this time frame is called emerging adulthood or transition to adulthood. And the idea here is that it's a transition into becoming an adult, and it's a very complex process, just like the transition into becoming into adolescence is difficult, but now it's even made bigger now because you're expected at this stage to take a lot of responsibility for your own life choices, and it's a time of increasing personal responsibility, not just only for your finances, but for your career and relationships. So it's a time where big decisions are being made in life and they're going to carry through your whole life, right? And Erikson's developmental theory talks about every stage of life being a precursor to the next stage of life. So the decisions that you make, the choices, the behaviors, and the patterns that you set up are going to follow you into the next stage of life. And so drawing upon Erikson's work, a psychologist by the name of Marcia proposed exploration and commitment as defining dimensions of identity. Exploration refers to sorting through various potential identity alternatives, whereas commitment represents selecting one or more alternatives to which to adhere. Marcia divided exploration and commitment into present and absent levels, and he crossed the exploration and commitment dimensions to create four identity status categories. Achievement represents a set of commitments enacted following a period of exploration. Moratorium refers to a state of active exploration with few commitments. The identity status of foreclosure, it's going to represent a set of commitments enacted without prior exploration. And then finally, diffusion represents an absence of commitments coupled with a lack of interest in exploration. So researchers, looking at review articles, the first question is, are there baseline factors that distinguish between financial behavior patterns? And researchers Tang, Baker, and Peter in 2015, what they found was that financial behavior is jointly determined by three levels of influence: cognitive understanding, meaning knowledge, and social interaction, socialization, and individual self-regulation. Research suggests in 2013 by Shim that individuals with achieved financial identity was associated with higher financial knowledge, higher financial self-efficacy, higher financial controllability, and people who have this identity have balanced thinking and more mature interpersonal relationships. And another study by Robb and Woodyard in 2011, they used a national survey of adults, and that survey showed that subjective knowledge was more strongly associated with behavior. And for instance, Xiao in 2014, drawing upon that study from Robb and Woodyard, a study of college students in which they examined credit card behaviors of college students, and they found that those with more subjective knowledge in the first year of college engaged in less risky paying and less risky borrowing credit behavior 3 years later. And so the effect of early objective knowledge was limited to single credit card behavior 3 years later, meaning they paid their credit card debt in full. So one aspect of financial identity that I think is looking at the research articles on this whole area of financial identity is parent-child financial communication during adolescence and during emerging adulthood is going to be associated with emerging adults practicing more healthy financial behaviors. And so when parents have positive expectation about their children's behavior, children are more likely to meet those expectations years later, and they're going to be in a state of achieved or foreclosed status because they have a basis of knowledge and a platform to go out and through adolescence by having healthy communications with their parents, and that's what the research indicates. So in the present study, researchers, they drew upon Erikson's theory of identity formation, and they wanted to empirically test Marcia's model of identity status, which I just stated earlier as achieved, foreclosed, moratorium, and diffused. And what they did is they took a data of they studied college students in their first and fourth year of college, and what they wanted to do was, in addition to psychological factors indicative of beliefs such as attitude, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control, they also tested a number of contextual related variables associated with financial socialization, meaning your parental and financial communication, formal financial education, work experiences, and perceived parental socioeconomic status. And they assumed that having a better understanding of the factors associated with financial identity formation will facilitate the design and implementation of intervention programs aimed at promoting financial literacy and financial responsibility among emerging adults. So they're looking at college students because it's an interesting bubble of time. When you're a college student, you're more independent from your parents in that you have to make decisions day to day on your own for the most part, but you're still tied to your parents because they're still paying for financial obligations associated with college. So it's an interesting group of people where they could focus on the development of financial behavior and identity amongst a somewhat of a homogeneous group. And so this is a longitudinal study because you want to see how things develop. And so you have to study them over a period of time. So they launched the first wave in the first year of college, and then they resurveyed students in the fourth year of college. And this was at a 4-year major public university in the United States. And they came up with the following hypothesis that they were going to test. The first hypothesis was that stability and developmental change will occur between T1 and T2, meaning between your first year of college and your last year of college. And evidence for stability will be stronger than evidence for developmental change, meaning you're in a state of financial identity. Let's say you're in a state of achieved in your first year of college. The trend is that they predict you're going to be in that same state in your last year of college. The second hypothesis was higher T1 parental communication will predict higher T2 achieved and higher T2 foreclosed statuses. More T1 financial education will predict higher T2 achieved and higher T2 foreclosed statuses, and more T1 work experience will predict higher T2 achieved status. The third hypothesis was that higher T1 financial attitude will predict higher T2 achieved and higher T2 foreclosed statuses, and then higher T1 parental subjective norms will predict higher T2 foreclosed status. And so now what they're doing is they have these set of hypotheses that they want to test over 4 years, and in order to test this hypothesis, they're going to use a number of measures, right? One of them is a financial identity scale. And that scale, it's going to consist of 12 items designed to measure the degree to which participants saw themselves reflected in each of the 4 identity statuses. So for achieved, based on past experiences, I've chosen the money management style that I want for now. Foreclosed, they'll have 3 items on that scale. My parents know what's best for me in terms of how I should take care of my finances. Then the other category is moratorium. There are so many different ways to manage money. I haven't decided which to follow, but I'm trying to figure it out. Diffused, I don't think about money much. I just kind of take it as it comes. So at T1 and T2, participants rated each item on a 5-point Likert scale. The next set of measures, financial education. At T1, participants were asked 2 questions to indicate how much financial education they had received in high school. the number of financial education classes and the number of financial workshops and seminars that they had attended. And the possible responses to both questions, they ranged from 0, meaning none, to 3, meaning 3 or more. And so prior research indicates that this is an area that needs to be addressed in high school, because there needs to be more financial counseling. There needs to be more students need to have more awareness when they hit college, because many of them, they don't receive this in high school, and most of it runs through their parents in terms of their level of having some sort of established financial identity. The other thing that they looked at was paid work experience. At T1, participants were asked whether or not they were employed outside the home during high school, and responses were coded as follows: 1 being no work experience during high school, 2 being that they worked only during the summer, and 3, they worked all year long. The next measure they looked at was financial attitudes. At T1, participants were asked to indicate their attitudes towards 6 typical financial behaviors, such as tracking monthly expenses on a 5-point scale. And so they used, the study had just a lot of measures looking at finances, and in conclusion, they took the data from these measures, and they came up with a structural equation model, which in psychology, it's good at predicting trends. And what they found was that after testing they developed a model of financial identity development, and they tested for evidence of several potential indicators, like I had said, parental financial communication, financial education, work experience, and perceived parental socioeconomic status. And what they found is that their hypothesis, one, is that what they found was that at T1, parental financial communication, having this rapport with your parents when it comes to finances, it was predictive of higher T2 and higher T2 foreclosed statuses. And they also found that at T1, financial education predicted higher T2 foreclosed status, but the association with T2 achieved status was not significant. So what the study basically indicates is, because there's a lot of different variables going on, a lot of things that they're testing for, but in a nutshell, what they found was that early financial behaviors, they do pave the way for subsequent financial behaviors. And I think after looking at this research article, I think in college, when you're in college, sometimes you're not thinking about the financial implications of some of your decisions that you're making. So for me, it's not about money, but it's about decision making, and how do you promote decision making in young adults in a way to make them understand the consequences of some of the decisions that they're making. They're not going to be felt until like they're 26 or 30 perhaps. But if you don't make them now, there's a greater likelihood that you're not going to like where you're going at that point, right, in life. So the way I look at this study is that first you have to have a good cognition about money and understand how the money system works. And so you have to know what interest rates are. You have to understand about how to repay your college loans. And so there's a socialization aspect of this, in which is, I think, is very significant, that in that the things that parents do, that significant others do, to educate you about how to be responsible with money. And the argument here is that this is a sort of a developmental process, in that the process of learning about money and having people tell you about money and observing them when you have it or you don't have it, is that you gain this self-awareness, like why do I care? Why is this relevant to me? Why do I need to know about this stuff? And unfortunately, there's some young adults who don't care about that, and the self-awareness part starts to say, I can see how this might make my life better, why it's important to me now, and how it pushes me in certain directions once once and then once I'm aware that I can change my behaviors, I'll adapt my behaviors because I know how the system works, and so I want to make the system work for me. And so I really love the study because I love the set of measures, like the financial knowledge measures. Like I said, cognition is really important, and the way they measured it objectively, and the measure of financial efficacy, how confident do you feel about your financials, financial controls, do you control your money or does your money control you, financial attitude, how do you feel about tracking your monthly expenses, financial parenting, um, and I think that has the most, looking upon all the literature that I've looked at, I think the best way to have hit the ground running in an achieve status is that just modeling your parents' behavior and a lot of common sense as well, I think goes a long way. And so I think ultimately that idea of financial parenting, if you look at it, if you look at the idea of financial parenting and of financial self-agency, I think these factors are the most important ones because it's something that it will promote your well-being in young adulthood, and it'll carry over through when you're going into a career and relationships. And I think we need to add this financial domain to this idea of young adult development, meaning having more classes in high school, not just an economics class, but having more classes that are going to help students realize that life's not a bowl of cherries. You have to make smart decisions with your money, because I've seen plenty of people that they've had money and they've blown it away through drugs, through alcohol, running around with being in relationships that didn't pan out. So you have to be really self-conscious about money, and then you have to have a set of behaviors that when it comes to money, you're making the right choices. And I think those when it pertains to money, and I think a lot of that is the two best things that will influence that would be your cognition, your understanding of money, and then how your parents raised you and how was that level of communication in your early adolescence. And that is my review article. Thank you.